You're listening to Packers Talk Network.
PackersTalk.com.
Welcome to the Packers Weekly Podcast, part of PackersTalk.com network. I'm your host, Miles Teddick, joined by your co-host, Tim Hamilton. We are diehard Packers fans. We just love talking about the Pack. We are not getting into all the national sports media talking points, all that nonsense. We're sticking to real football and diving into the top topics around the Pack. Every week during the season, we're breaking down them games, and during the offseason now, we're sorting through all that drama, all the draft stuff, all the free agency rumors and beyond of the offseason. If y'all want to support the podcast, please spike that like button for us. Subscribe and follow on all the socials, but most importantly, please head on over to that Packers Talk YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button there. Hit that little bell next to it for the bonus points. We love and appreciate y'all for doing so. Always have a great time with our listeners and subscribers. So thank y'all for hanging out and listening to us every week. Tonight, getting into some free agency. We got some breaking news that I had to just get right here before we started this podcast. Tim broke the news to me. I didn't even get to see Twitter or X before this happened. So just fresh breaking news here. New free agent signing. Going to leave you hanging on the edge of your seat for just a moment while we get a word from our sponsor. Once again, Wisconsin's own Ticket King. For over 30 years, Ticket King has been providing Packers tickets to Packers fans, as well as Bucks, Brewers, and Summerfest tickets. That season is coming around, y'all. You can find them on the web at theticketking.com or visit their locations in Green Bay and Milwaukee. Remember to support those local Wisconsin businesses. Take care of them. They take care of you. All right, Tim, how we doing this evening, sir? We got some breaking news. What is going on here?
Yeah, we sure do. It's a nice little way to lead in for us, huh? Little breaking news. The Packers, hey, they signed a receiver. Everybody's wanted a receiver. Yeah, not quite. I don't think it's going to make very many people happy, but it is a receiver. Certainly don't think he's ever going to be their number one receiver, but it's a receiver. So Mecole Hardman from the Kansas City Chiefs. He's been there for a little bit. Had a game-winning catch in overtime of the Super Bowl last season, beat the 49ers. And they picked him up. Don't really expect him to contribute a whole lot at receiver. I think this is more a special teams move. I think what we see from him on offense is going to be more of a gadget guy. You know, if you remember back to when they got Tyler Ervin back in 2019 and LaFleur had him running some gadget stuff, I think they could bring some of that back for Hardman. Maybe we see him a little more at receiver. Maybe he takes some of the deep routes because he can run. He's got tons of speed. So maybe he stretches the field a little bit in a way that MVS did in the past. But I think he's probably going to be primarily like jet sweep guy, end around, throw him some screens, stuff like that. His productivity at receiver has really dropped over the last few years from where it used to be. But it's something that improves the depth. It gives him a speed guy. And I think more importantly, it's going to help them on special teams because, you know, locker room cleanout day, Keyshawn Nixon came out and said he doesn't want to return kicks anymore. The Packers tried to kind of, throw a little water on that and said, well, he's just frustrated. But I think, and I think Goody's comment at one point was he'd like to have multiple options at returner. So now he does. And it's also a way to get Jaden Reed off punt returns where he hasn't been very productive. And it's just something to take off his plate. And Hardman, has had some production there at kick return and punt return in his career. So I think that's primarily what this is going to be, a return guy and then, a gadget guy on offense. I don't think it's a big impact receiver that everybody's wanted, but, it makes sense. And it's a 1-year deal. Haven't seen any of the money reported. So I'm going to guess it's probably near the minimum, or probably not too much above that. So what the hell? It's worth a shot. And if it improves your run game or return game, it's worth it. Experienced return guy like this. So yeah, it's not the, it's not the great improvement that a lot of people want at receiver, but it's definitely somebody that improves the depth there and somebody with experience. So yeah, to me, what the hell? It's worth a shot. And if it helps the special teams, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean that's where I'm at. Of course, they finally sign a receiver and nobody will be happy about it. I
Right.
get that. That's just how Packers fans are. I'm starting to pick up on that pulse that that nobody hates the Packers as much as Packers fans in the offseason. But no, I like the move. I think that it illustrates the importance of listening to Goot. Like, he does tell us stuff, right? Like, he will tip his hand on certain things, and maybe not enough for you to be like, oh, maybe he's looking at McCole Hardman. But like you're saying, he wanted multiple options at returner. I think it makes total sense for him to come in as a returner. He's a fast dude. He can be used as a gadget guy on offense, and they're seeing that they need depth on offense at all the different positions. If Jaden Reed goes down, he's a pretty natural replacement for Jaden Reed's skill set. So yeah, I think it's a smart move. And a lot of these moves seem to have similar themes as far as what they do and what they give the team. And what I see is flexibility, right? And I think that we're at this point now in the offseason where some people are just not happy. Well, we didn't make enough moves. All the receivers are gone, right? And there's just no pass rushers are left. There's no hope. We're all doomed. There's one post that kind of made it seem like, how could they ever get better? And it's like, gosh, I don't know. They might work out or something this offseason. Maybe just maybe the guys on the team will get a little bit better. Sometimes that happens. It's a freak accident, I know, but it does happen. So yeah, overall, I think really this is kind of a fun piece to answer the question that we were coming into the podcast with, which is, have the Packers gotten better in free agency?
Yeah, I think they have. I certainly think they have. They've improved the offensive line for sure. The fact that you're swapping out Josh Myers for Aaron Banks, and more importantly, it's not only Aaron Banks, but you're improving at center, but just by moving Elton Jenkins there, I think that's a big improvement over Josh Myers. And then I think Aaron Banks is going to be at least a solid left guard for you. So I think the offensive line is definitely improved. And they were good last year, but there's a lot they can get better at. And certainly, I think adding Banks and moving Elton Jenkins to a new position will improve them from what they were last season. And then I think adding Hobbs in the secondary at cornerback, it gives you versatility and flexibility as far as where you're going to play everybody. If you're going to line them up at certain spots week to week, you can do that now. And you have, these guys that are interchangeable. Nixon's can play the slot and outside. Hobbs can play the slot and outside. You have Bullard, who's a safety and a nickel, and you have Williams, who's a safety, but he can probably do some nickel things for you as well. So you have versatility there, and I think you've just improved by adding Hobbs, who's people are going to be surprised. I think he's going to be a really nice pickup for them. So, yeah, and they didn't really lose much. The biggest loss was TJ Slayton, which, TJ Slayton did a good job the last season and a half. Really nice job in run defense, and he's somebody they're going to have to replace, but he's not one of those guys that's impossible to replace. And when you're heading into a draft that's very deep along the defensive line, I think they're going to be able to replace him with somebody that's much cheaper. It's a more cost-effective move. So yeah, they're definitely improved. But at the same time, I get the frustrations that some people have in that they didn't address pass rusher like we were all expecting. They haven't done that yet. And that's still something that can happen. I think we're going to certainly see that in the draft. They're going to attack pass rusher, whether that's edge, interior, both. But yeah, they didn't go out and do that in free agency. And that's the one, negative that I see. That's the one drawback, is because right now they were just relying on the guys they already have who last season weren't good enough. So you're relying on the same guys to make improvement. Yeah, you got to hope for that. And you're hoping the new defensive line coach can, help them make that improvement. But you need better players too. You need improvements just in personnel, and they have yet to do that. I'm not saying they can't. We're a week into free agency, but all the big moves are gone unless Trey Hendrickson becomes available, but it's trending like he's going back to Cincinnati. It's a lot to rely on improvement from within and rely on draft picks, because we see with, not just their draft picks, but any draft picks, it takes them a while to develop. And when you're picking towards the bottom of the first round, it's not going to be a guy most likely who's going to come in there and get you, 10 sacks right off the bat. He might take 2 or 3 years. We saw that with Sean Gary. We're seeing that with Van Ness. It's going to take some time to develop. So, yeah, I get people being disappointed they didn't add a pass rusher. But I think overall the offensive line's better. The secondary's better at cornerback. I think they're a better team right now than they were at the end of 2024, but certainly a long way to go where, there needs to be continual improvement. They can't stop the acquisitions now. They have to see, what potentially could shake loose before the draft and after the draft with, if there's veterans that become available.
Yeah, and I think they're looking at this, fans have a little bit more of a narrow perspective on this than the front office does. We look at free agency and there's some flashy options, and we get our heart set on some of them, and then they get signed and we think, oh, well, darn, now what could possibly happen? But the Packers are looking at it like they know the assets across the board that can be available through trade. There's certainly a pool of guys that they have on a list that they probably have, in some way, shape, or form, an assumption that they're available through trade, right? Like, so there's probably guys that are at the higher end of the cost, right? Like your Micah Parsons going to cost you everything. And then, you probably go on down from there and price wise or cost wise. And then obviously the draft. I do think, and we'll get into this whenever we do the edge rush guys, and maybe we can combine edge rush and D-line on an episode in the next couple of weeks. But I do think that there's going to be some good options for them to improve the talent for rushing. And I think that we also need to go back and listen to one thing that Good said. And one thing that he really, I don't know if he repeated it, but I know he said it very clearly, is he expects to get more pressure with the front four. So I don't know that his idea is to totally go out and get a big stud edge rusher. I think it's more and the first piece of it is the coach, but just rebuilding the philosophy and the expectations along that piece of the defense, right? If your expectation is to get more pressure with that front four, yeah, you got to get better, but part of that is getting the guys you got in the right place, and so it's not like you need to go out and have 3 or 4 additions to this room. 1 or 2 quality additions will make a big difference, and one of our buddies, Felipe, is in the chat here. Good to see you, Felipe. Thanks for jumping in with us. It says, good evening, fellas. I get the feeling that the Packers will prioritize IDL, interior D-line, over edge in the draft. What do you guys think? And that is what I agree with. I think that is right along the lines with what I just referred to, and Jude saying that they expect to get more pressure with that front four. Certainly an edge rush is part of that, but I think more so they're looking for that penetration in the middle, that interior defensive line holding up their end of the deal a little bit better. And when you do that, you're going to create more opportunities for those talented guys you've got on the outside already, and Gary and Van Ness and, a few of the other guys behind them. But, yeah, what do you think, man? You think that they're likely to prioritize interior versus edge in that first pick?
Well, I hope it's both, to be honest. But yeah, I'm kind of feeling interior as well. I just think that we didn't see a whole lot of interior pressure from them last year, and they have some questions with contract situations coming up in the future. And yes, it's a deep draft on the defensive line, especially interior, but we know how they not only draft for now, they're drafting for the future. So they're looking ahead. Wyatt's contract's coming due. Kenny Clark, he just signed the extension, but he had a very disappointing season. They can get out of the contract with not a ton of damage to them after next season. Carl Brooks, I thought, was better as a rookie. Not saying they're going to give up on him by any means yet, but I thought he was better in 23 than he was in 24. But I think they can look there and be like, we have some questions down the line here at defensive tackle. So yeah, that could take priority. And the way the first round is going to fall, I think there's going to be probably more Packer type defensive tackles there in the first round where they're picking than there are going to be Packer type edge rushers. So yeah, I think at this point I'm leaning that way too, that we're going to see a defensive tackle taken before we see an edge rusher for the Packers.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that that's the way the draft falls, it looks like. And I think it's also that just kind of aligns better with their needs. But there's some sneaky options. We're going to get into them whenever we go review those positions. I've already started kind of peeking at that list a little bit. And there's some sneaky options on, that fit the mold for edge rush that they usually go for. And I think that there's a lot of potential still to improve this unit throughout the offseason. So, have the Packers gotten better in free agency? Yes, I think so too. I like both of the signings. I'm not even really interested in the money side of it at this point. Look, the guys in the office have proven that they can handle it. They did the kick the can down the road thing, which seemed wildly reckless and crazy, and we thought we were going to be in this cap hell and all of that, and they navigated that with grace, and now you're on the other side of that and the upswing of that. And it's like, look, if these guys sign these guys for what they did, I trust that it's a good value. The Packers haven't really gotten just completely fleeced in a lot of deals. You know what I mean? You haven't looked at a lot of those deals. You're like, man, I can't believe they paid that guy that much. There's been a few, but not a lot, right?
Right. And, I think I like the free agent signings too, and I like them more that, having looked into Hobbs and Banks over the last week and really seen what they've done in the past and how they can fit in. I like them a lot more now than I did when they, happened. And I understand where the Packers are coming from with the moves, but I think so many people are upset. It's just because these guys weren't on anybody's radar. Like nobody was expecting them to sign a guard. And I think a lot of people, me included, expected a corner, but we weren't talking about Nate Hobbs, right? So I think that's part of the perception, like, oh, they didn't do anything or they didn't improve enough because we see all these other guys sign in and it's like, you don't know that, you weren't expecting it. So I think that throws people off. And I keep going back, and you and I have talked about this previously, is that it was such a weak free agent class. Like there weren't very many players. And every year I go through it before and I'll make my list of guys who I think would be good for the Packers. And I think this year I had like 5 or 6 guys on that. And a couple of them were kind of maybe a stretch even there. There just weren't very many guys that I thought made sense for them. And some of them, Chase Young, Khalil Mack, didn't even make it to free agency. And I mean, there were very few deals that I saw sign where I'm like, that would, I think the Packers should have done that, or maybe they tried to and it didn't work out for whatever reason. We don't know that, but very few. Josh Sweat was one that I thought made sense. He went to the Cardinals and, it was probably not as much money as I thought he was going to get. That one would have made sense. But other than that, very, very few deals that I thought, darn, the Packers could have done that and should have done that. There weren't a whole lot of good players. There certainly were very, very few difference makers available. So they had the money, they had the cap space. I thought maybe they would, I don't want to say do more, but maybe there would be a bigger splash, I guess. But when you really look at it, like there weren't the players to spend it on. And, what are you going to do? Like, you don't want them to just throw silly money. Right. You don't want to throw silly money around and force it on players who aren't going to work out for you. So, it didn't work out and you just got it. It doesn't mean that a week into free agency now or a month from now, like you can't go out and acquire more players. Like we've seen them acquire guys after the draft or around the draft that shake free that worked out for them. So,
yeah, I'm pretty sure Charles Woodson was a May signing. Wasn't he?
Well, he was right before the draft.
Right before the draft.
Yeah, but they got Devondre Campbell after the draft. He worked out for a season. Big Dog, Mercedes Lewis was after the draft. Like, we got to see. And, as we go into training camp and then there's time to acquire more guys. And they still have that roster cap room as flexibility. So that's helpful too. It was a poor free agent class to begin with. So I understand their thinking, and not, going out after some of these guys that signed massive contracts, because I think there's going to be a lot of mistakes that were made in free agency.
Yeah, and I think we see that all the time. Gosh, I mean, just I remember it almost year in, year out. There's somebody that goes off and overpays a player, and that player doesn't perform, and it cripples the team. And we see tangible things, but there's personal damage done within, right? You start looking like, damn, they paid that guy that kind of money. What the hell? And it just really can be cancerous to spend money in the wrong place in a lot of ways. And so I trust how the Packers spent. I don't look at those deals and go, oh man, they paid too much. I think, for one, they're paying for what they think they're getting, not for what these players have already done. And I trust their judgment in that. They've really done pretty well with free agents, So like you're saying, there's several examples of opportunities for more, but there's also several examples of these guys being solid signings, solid contributors. Will they all be all pros? No, you don't need them to be, but these constant additions like this is what bolsters depth and gives you those pieces to fall back on when you need to, like what happened in the playoffs. And to be fair, I think some folks are acting like maybe they reached real deep down the list of free agents to get these guys, that these are like nobodies or something. And it's like, no, I mean, like we talked about, Nate Hobbs was on my radar a little bit. He seemed to fit the mold, and he was just right there. I mean, he was just kind of right at, the next guy on the list from some of the names that we were already talking about. And same thing with Aaron Banks. You look at the list of top guards out there on the market. He was the next one on the list after the common names that got talked about. So they were just sort of right there on the fringe of the radar for top free agents at their positions. It's not like they reached all the way down in the bargain bin. I think honestly, McCole Hardman is probably the deepest reach in the bargain bin, which is not bad. I mean,
No.
Let's see here. Our friend R Showers jumped in here. He's short, he's fast, special teams and backup slot. He's better than some scrub, I think. And I think I agree with that. What I would build on that is your alternative, and this is where I argue the point of flexibility, but your alternative is probably a rookie, right? You're probably drafting somebody, or somebody's gonna make the team from the practice squad or something like that, and it's gonna be somebody who's less experienced, less trustworthy, maybe less available for to be a returner or special teams. Whereas this guy, not only he's got some special teams value, you've seen that, but he's a veteran. He's been on championship teams. He's been around the league and seen some different organizations and how they operate. And it's not like they hired him without talking to him. You bring him in and you kind of do the personality test, and if you like what you see, that I don't think the skill is any question with McCole Hardman, and I think it is a really nice, like a luxury to have a veteran guy like that being in a backup situation as a receiver for Jaden Reed and those probably Wicks too. But then in situations, he's a little bit of a weapon. You can get some of these different packages mixed up and really throw some pieces around and confuse defenses. So I think there's a lot of different ways to get value out of McCole Hardman.
Yeah, just having a veteran back there to return kicks, I like it. And Jaden Reed hasn't been very productive doing it. It also kind of takes that off his plate. So he can just be a receiver. We don't have the injury risk upon returns too. Keyshawn Nixon's been really good returning kickoffs. It's just he hasn't had that many opportunities, and obviously he's gotten frustrated at it. And if he's going to be a starting cornerback, like it certainly looks like he's going to be again, you want to protect your starters, right? And so he doesn't have to have that injury risk either. So Hardman's been doing it for a long time now. He's a veteran. It's nice to have that. And we can go back through, not too distant Packers history and see some of the return options they have. It hasn't been pretty, and it hasn't been a veteran like this, really. They've entrusted it to a lot of younger players and experienced guys, and the results weren't good, weren't pretty. So yeah, as far as the return game, I think that's primarily what this is. And then you throw in the ability to be their new kind of Tyler Irving gadget guy. He's going to come in and he's going to run jet sweeps, and maybe you throw in some screens, or maybe you let him run down the field and try to stretch the defense. Like, I don't think he's going to have a big role on offense, but it's going to be something that forces other teams to prepare for it. And it's just a little extra, and it's not bad in having that speed out there on the field. Like, he can pop one at any time. So yeah, I mean, we'll see when the numbers come in eventually, like how much they spent, but I'm guessing it's, the minimum or right above the minimum. So that's fine. Like, if this is the role you're asking for and that's what you're paying him, I think it's a nice signing. And not every signing is going to be an all pro, but you don't need them to be. You need them to fit their role. And I'm sure they have a clear role for what they want Hardman to be.
Yeah. And you raise the floor on your depth, your depth isn't a rookie who's just figuring out how to be a functioning adult in reality. You know what I mean? There's some real life learning curves there. He's a grown man. He's been around the league and he can take care of his business. And to your point, they love that speed, man. Speed's something that you really can't teach. Once you're in the NFL, you either got it or you don't. There's a lot of things you can teach. Man, having that speed is nice. It is nice.
Yeah, and it like you said, it improves the depth. And a guy like Bo Melton, this is more competition. Like, he's going to have to come in and really earn a roster spot.
For sure, yeah.
And as far as like looking forward, this doesn't change anything for the receiver position. Like, it's not like, hey, now they don't need to draft a receiver. No, it changes none of that. They still need to draft a receiver, and I think they will. And I think it's going to be day 2 receiver. But it doesn't change anything. It just helps your depth and it helps your special teams, and gives you a trusted veteran back there on returns.
Yeah, and I think that's enough, because again, it's not like they're going to be paying a ton for this guy. He's on a pretty minimum deal, I think. So yeah, I think they have gotten better in free agency so far, and the biggest things, and just to kind of reassess or re-stress or whatever. I can't talk tonight. Restate. There we go. Restate it.
There you go.
The biggest thing they're giving themselves is the flexibility, right? And going into the draft, especially a draft like this, and these guys, they're going to be confident in their evaluations, but this definitely feels like a draft that might be tough to predict other people's evaluations, right? So maybe you're okay with how you built your board, but I think it's going to be really tough to predict how other people's boards are being built. Excuse me. So that to me, you want as many options as you can have to be comfortable with at each pick, right? So, you don't want to be at, your first round pick going, gosh, I hope one of these corners we like drops to us, and, not have a plan B if a corner that you don't like drops to, and you want to be like, hey, look, we like, 3 of these interior D linemen, 3 of these edge guys, 3 of these corners. We like these guys. There's even a couple of receivers we might go. Like, that's what you want. You want to have a plethora of options there that you can feel good about and not pinned into because, well, we've already got a bunch of corners, so we don't, I guess, this guy, he dropped to us. He's good. We got to take him, but we really could have used somebody else. That you don't want to be pinned into that. So I like what they're doing. They've given themselves flexibility, and not only that, to make moves in the draft, right? There's still players on the roster that I think could end up being moved. Malik Heath is one that the chat's starting to talk about. Excuse me, not Malik Heath. I saw Malik Heath. Malik Willis is one. There we go. Malik Willis, I think, is definitely has a lot of potential to be moved. There's value for his skills, and when the draft heats up and, maybe a team misses a quarterback that they were hoping to get. All right, now we need a plan B. I think Malik Willis is on a lot of people's radar as that, and he's not going to take a king's ransom to acquire. I think that also factors into it, makes it a little bit more of an attractive option for other teams. So, there's a piece that could be up for, a trade somewhere. Obviously Jair is one that everybody's talking about. And I think that's probably the most likely way for him to move, would be in some sort of package deal during the draft. Again, the urgency and value shifts as the draft happens, right? So, we were kind of having a fun conversation about one of these PFF mock drafts, but where there was a situation that Cam Ward dropped to the Packers at 23. Well, I'll tell you what, that 23 pick becomes real damn valuable all of a sudden if Cam Ward is still on the board. There's a handful of quarterback needy teams that are going to be wanting to acquire that pick. So that's where, and I'm certainly not suggesting that that's a realistic outcome, but it is just a way to illustrate the point that, if certain players drop to you in a position that you don't really need those players, but there's a handful of teams around you that do, that increases that value and can definitely make packages a little bit easier to create in trades and get those deals done. When you're doing that, having assets like a Jair, who, maybe you're okay with parting ways with, maybe you're not, I don't know. We'll find out. A Malik Willis, those types, I think. Even one of your receivers, I think that there's a few options there, and you've given yourself that flexibility now to make those moves if they present themselves in the draft. That's my assessment.
And I think it allows them. They added a corner, they added an offensive lineman. It doesn't mean they won't take those positions, but it doesn't force them to. They're not huge needs, priority needs. But, if you're there in the first or second round and the best guy on your board's a corner, sure, go take them. But you don't feel like you have to fill that position immediately. So I think it allows them to focus on defensive tackle, edge rusher, wide receiver. And they still need to add offensive linemen. And I'll say that every year, you continue to add offensive linemen because it's such an important position. Absolutely. And you go through injuries and sometimes development can take a while. So I expect them to add offensive linemen, but it's not as much of a priority now because you went out and got Banks and you're moving Jenkins to center, so your center position's filled. So it just allows you to focus other spots and kind of, really makes those the priority needs now. Cornerback, offensive line, sure, go get them, but you don't have to attack it as aggressively now because you helped yourself in free agency.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I think it sets you up well. And, our Showers is on it. This is a big topic. This draft screams trade down for what we need. I think that this is going to be a big part of the draft. And also, again, kind of related to what I just described, is it's going to be tough to predict how other teams have their board built. Again, I don't think that the Packers have a problem with evaluations. I think they're pretty confident in how they build their board, but how other teams build their own boards affects how you would predict whether somebody's going to make it to you or not. So, one of the kind of chatters that's starting to bubble up is there's only probably, about 15 true round one graded guys in this draft. And so think about the justification for the trade for Jordan Love back in 2020. After the fact, Goody said that was their last round one graded guy. So it was either go get Love and get a round one graded player or trade back. And, they obviously made the decision that they made. As they say, the rest is history. But I think this is one of those drafts where you might end up in a similar situation and being where they're at 23. What is the cost to go up into the top 20, maybe even into the top 15, if you start to see your round one graded guys dwindle pretty quickly and you've got to make a move to either go get them or get back out, go get some more value, pick up a second or third round pick, something like that. I think they're going to get put into that position. And, one of the groups that we're talking about tonight, I think could be part of that situation. But, as we get into our draft series, it's probably a good time to start right now anyway. We're talking about tight ends and running backs tonight. I do believe that there are some folks in these groups that have Packers written on them, maybe. But which group should we start with here, Tim? Should we start with running backs or start with tight ends?
Tight ends first.
You want to jump into tight ends?
Yeah, let's do tight ends.
All right, tight ends. Well, the headliner of the group here is no secret, Tyler Warren. I think that's a pretty easy thing to agree on right now. You might call it consensus at this point. Guy's a beast. he should not be available for the Packers. We'll just say that.
I can't imagine he is. If he is, I don't know what happened. Something happened between now and the draft. Maybe I don't know, did something bad. Yeah, he should not be available. He's the best tight end in the draft. As a Penn State fan, I saw a lot of him. He's awesome. He's a fun player to watch. Their offense in 2024, it was entirely built and run through him at tight end. And I think that's kind of rare. I think it's really rare in college football nowadays. He was a guy that played on the line. They put him in the slot. They split him out wide. He played wildcat quarterback. He had pass attempts. He had rushes, not just, we saw Tucker Kraft do some of the under center quarterback sneaks. He was literally in the wildcat, taking the ball and running up the middle and scoring touchdowns with it. He did everything for him. And every team each week, Penn State didn't really have any receivers to threaten anyone. So he was the focus of every team every week, and he was really good every week. Like I said, they built the offense around him. They have two good backs who will be in the draft next year, and they're both NFL running backs, but the entire offense ran through Tyler Warren. Really impressive. Contested catches, strong hands, the ability to run after the catch, runs good routes, doesn't have the blazing speed. I've seen some comparisons to like Dallas Clark kind of tight end. I like that comparison. He's not a Gronk. He's not that big. He's not that, physical. And like I said, he's not a huge speed guy, but he can run. He just knows how to get open. He knows how to, even when he's not open, he knows how to catch the ball. Just throw him the ball and he'll come down with it. I believe he was a quarterback at one point in high school. He's got good athletic ability. He's a tight end that you're going to draft and you're never going to look back and be disappointed. Like, he'll be your starting tight end for 10 years in the league.
Yeah.
Really good player. Not a great blocker yet, but they didn't ask him to do a ton of that, especially in line. I think it's something he's okay with. And I think, he can obviously get better at it. I don't think he'll ever be a great blocking tight end, but I don't think he'll be a disaster either. He's a really good player, and he's a really fun player to watch because of all the different things they did with him at Penn State. So I think he's far and away the top tight end in this class. And yeah, as far as the Packers pick, I would be shocked if he was somehow still on the board at 23.
Yeah, and that's where I don't think he would get to that point.
No.
I think that he might creep his way out of the top 10, and then the Packers start having a decision to make. And again, that really hinges on how many round one grade guys they've got. But there are some murmurs that there's not enough for all the first round picks. So you have to start making decisions. But yeah, real quick, my assessment of Tyler Warren, he's got elite spatial awareness. He's good at tight end for the same reason Travis Kelce is good at tight end. And it's not to say that he's as good as Travis Kelce, but that it's the same thing that he's good at, which is finding space between defenders. It seems simple, and really it is. But it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do. You have to be very good at understanding where guys are and where guys are supposed to be, where they're going to be all the time. It's got to be kind of an instinctive thing. You're not thinking about it, right? It's more of a feel thing, and he is very, very good at it. It's got to be just frustrating as hell to be a defense against that guy because he's slippery. He gets open. Like you're saying, he just gets open.
Yes.
He knows how to have the ball in his hands, and that's why they handed him the ball. It's why they let him take snaps. He's a trustworthy dude. And I see some naysayers in the chat about Tyler Warren. I'm telling you guys, I think if the Packers have a chance to go get this guy, they're going to go get this guy. He's a football player. Like, this is a guy that you could put, and I know we have two tight ends, and you guys you get a lot of grace for Musgrave that you don't have for Jair Alexander as far as injuries go, or Watson for that matter. So I'm not sure what that's about, but you do need to start thinking about an idea that maybe Musgrave isn't, long term. Maybe he's, the way he plays, he's injury prone. If you could put Tyler Warren next to Tucker Kraft, my goodness, you're going to have what Bill Belichick wish he could have had with Gronk and Hernandez. Like that's what he was trying to do. That
We
would be
wouldn't.
an insane combination for years to come.
Yeah, we wouldn't have to worry about who's the wide receiver one because they would be living in 12
Won't effing
personnel.
matter. Yeah,
Yeah.
it will not matter.
Yeah.
And opposing safeties will be in hell all game long. Yeah, you don't pass on an opportunity to get a guy like that as long as it's a reasonable opportunity. You don't go mortgage the farm to get him. But again, if he starts sliding out of the top 10, and you can get a reasonable trade up for him, and that's one of the last grade 1 guys you got, I think you go get him and you get a grade 1 guy out of this draft. And it just kind of depends on the price. In Goot we trust when it comes to those things. But Tyler Warren is undisputed number 1 tight end. And after that, it's not that, the guys are bad. They're just not as good. And there's a lot of question marks, So Loveland is kind of the popular tight end 2 option, a kid out of Michigan. 6'4", 240, or excuse me, 6'6", 248. He caught 56 balls for 528 yards last season, 5 touchdowns. It's all right. You watch him. He's not bad. He just doesn't jump off the page to me.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't have a quarterback last year, and he played through some injuries. So I think if you look at him in 23, he looked a lot better because he had a legitimate quarterback throwing to him and he was healthy. But he seems like he's the pass catching tight end. Like he's not going to be your Tucker Kraft, do everything kind of tight end. Like he's got to be slot guy, pass catcher, try to get him down the seam, try to get him run after the catch guy, which is fine. That's fine. But I think there are more well-rounded tight ends, more versatile tight ends than Loveland, but he is a really good pass catcher when he's healthy.
Well, I'm not saying he's not. I'm just saying he doesn't really jump off the page for me. I watched a little bit of him, didn't watch, I can't say I watched every snap in every game, but I watched a few games. I try to not do the highlight reel thing. I don't want to see your highlight reel. I just want to watch snaps. Like, how are you doing snap to snap, and what are you doing, and where is it you're showing up, and how. And again, he's not bad. He just feels kind of vanilla. He feels like he's going to be a backup tight end in the league. He doesn't feel like a guy who's going to come in the league and be a star, be a tight end 1 or all pro tight end or someone like that. So yeah, Loveland, I'm not as wild about. Maybe I need to watch a little bit more of his film, go back to 23 and see, if he looks a little bit more explosive. But again, not to say he's bad. He's my tight end 4 on my big board for what my genius brain and opinion is worth. And it's not by a big margin. I don't think there's a real big difference between tight end 2 and tight end 4, in my opinion. But my 2 and 3 are probably not common options. One of them maybe is, but my tight end 2 is Elijah Arroyo out of Miami.
Yes.
He really didn't get hardly any snaps until this last season, 2024. So there's probably still a lot to be proven about him, but his athleticism is nuts. His athleticism jumps off the charts. Like you watch him, and running fast looks easy. Like jumping looks easy. You know what I mean? Like doing explosive things. He doesn't look like he's trying hard. He's got a lot of explosive plays. More deep catches than most tight ends. I think he had like 8, and the other guys had like 3 or 2 or 3. So yeah, his athleticism and his upside to me seems like it could be as high as anybody. I don't think as a blocking tight end probably as much, but he's 6'5", 250. So he's not tiny. He's not small. So he can block, but he's an athlete, man. This is a guy that he's going to make safeties have nightmares. When you see this guy running at you and you question whether or not you can keep up with him, and you also know he can jump out of the gym, it's going to be a problem. So I like Arroyo as tight end 2 in this draft. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about him?
No, I agree with you. I like him a lot too. He was really good at the Senior Bowl. We know how the Packers love Senior Bowl guys. So no, I'm with you on Arroyo. And you're seeing like a lot of like Loveland's going to be a first round tight end, and you could get Arroyo in the second round probably. I think it's probably better value to get him in the second round than to take a first round pick on Loveland, but that's just me.
Yeah, he is one that you might be able to get for a good value pick in the second round, maybe even the third, depending on how these teams are evaluating him. Again, there's a lot to be proven, right? He didn't play much until this last season, so he's really only got one season of tape to put out there. So if there are question marks, there's not a lot of answers yet. So that might cause him to slide, but just watching him on the tape, man, he looks like a guy you want in your offense. He really looks like a fun piece to have for an offensive coordinator. My third guy, and again, I don't think this will be a surprise to talk about this guy, but I don't think anybody else probably has him as tight end 3 at this point, is Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green. He is a bit undersized for a tight end. He's at 6'3", 241, but just produced. He just crushed it the last 2 years at Bowling Green. This last season, 117 catches for 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns. I mean, he's an offensive weapon because he also ran the ball a lot. He ran for 7.2 yards a carry on 9 carries, a touchdown. He's a piece, man. He's somebody that maybe you could call him a poor man's Tyler Warren because he's smaller, but he's a football player. Like, he's not a guy who's going to be stuck at tight end. He's going to be used as an offensive weapon, and I don't know how great of a blocker he's going to be, but he's a weapon, and I think this is going to be one of those value pieces that, because he's kind of undersized for a tight end, oversized for a receiver, he's in that tweener stage, he might slide, and I think this guy is going to produce in the NFL.
Okay. Yeah, I know he's highly productive. I know, that tweener size is usually not something the Packers like themselves, but for an athletic guy like that and a big time producer, yeah, it could be. And he certainly put up huge numbers, at Bowling Green. And yeah, he's an interesting one. He's kind of unique to this class, I would say, among all the tight ends.
Yeah, he is. He's unique. I like him a lot because of that production. Production's important. You got to ask yourself, does his size hold him back in the NFL? And I think if you're looking at him solely as a tight end, yes. So there will be some teams that look at him and go, man, he's probably pretty far down our board. Other teams, maybe like the Rams or the Niners or the Packers, they like that H-back type guy, that Kyle Juszczyk. Is it Juszczyk? Juszczyk.
The fullback.
Looks like Jacuzzi.
Yeah.
Juszczyk, that Kyle Juszczyk type guy. They value those pieces, and that's where I could see him maybe fitting into, is maybe a more athletic, like modern age fullback almost, which probably what you wanted Joseph DeGuara to be, right? And if you get him in the right system, man, I think he's going to be a problem. So I just leave that. Like I said, I got Colston at tight end 4, Colston Loveland. I don't have anything bad to say about him. He just kind of doesn't jump off the page. He definitely looks like he's got a lot of potential, but just sort of feels kind of vanilla to me. And then Mason Taylor out of LSU is my tight end 5 in this class. He's another one that I looked at. I'm like, yeah, he looks good. Looks like he's got potential. Like, he looks athletic. He kind of looks like Musgrave to me a little bit. They look like they kind of have similar body types and maybe running styles. And then I asked myself, like, why didn't he produce as much? And then I realized, like, oh yeah, he's had world-class receivers hanging out in that offense for the last few years. So, he hasn't really had a chance to be the real feature piece of that LSU offense. But definitely looks like he's loaded with potential. So I like Mason Taylor. So those are my top 5. I see a lot of names flying around the chat. Gadsden out of Syracuse is one we've talked about a little bit. I definitely think that he could be a great value pick, on a day 3 pick. he's got good size. He definitely has good receiver ability. I think he's probably being a little bit underestimated or underrated as a true tight end. He's probably being pegged a little bit like Harold Fannin Jr., where guys assume he's undersized and he's not. Like, I believe he weighed in at 250. I believe he's 6'5". I mean, he's a big guy. And, he was at the Shrine Bowl. He's a big guy. I can attest firsthand he's a big guy. So he's definitely one that I could see being a good value piece on day 3 to be used as an offensive weapon, a lot like I just described Harold Fannin Jr. But yeah, there's some good options, in this group. The star power is not big, but the depth is really there's a lot of value on day 3. A lot of value after tight end 5.
When you were down at the Shrine Bowl, was Luke Lachey down there from Iowa, the Iowa tight end?
Lackey, right?
Lackey, Lachey, however you pronounce it.
Names.
Okay.
So he was at the Shrine Bowl. He had a decent Shrine Bowl, but probably kind of an underwhelming Shrine Bowl. I mean, coming into that, I was familiar with him being a Big Ten guy. I kind of thought he would do well. He had some decent practices, and then I believe he played in the game, but just didn't do much.
Okay.
So yeah, he's one that I don't know. He's definitely a day 3 guy. He's sliding down the list a little bit, but it's not Iowa tight ends, man. Don't
Iowa
sleep
tight
on
ends,
them.
right?
They're all good,
and they're always well-rounded guys. Yeah, he was one, and then the Mitchell Evans kid from Notre Dame. I saw him late in the year throughout the playoffs. Good size, and he was kind of became their go-to target.
Yeah,
produced for him. Yeah, I think from a Packers perspective, I wouldn't expect a tight end the first 2 days, but I certainly think it's a good possibility on day 3 they draft one. I mean, just obviously Kraft is number 1, Musgraves 2, but Musgraves had the injury issues. I don't think they're ready to give up on him, but he's got to stay on the field. Right. And then after that, Ben Sims, if they bring back the Fitzpatrick kid, who actually was active for the playoff game when they scratched Sims. So I think they need to improve the depth and at least give competition for that number 3 tight end spot. So, and maybe looking further down the line, developing somebody if Musgrave doesn't work out with his injuries. So, yeah, I think a day 3 guy is certainly a possibility in this draft for the Packers.
Yeah, I do. I would expect them to take a tight end in this draft. I think even the later in the draft it gets, maybe the more likely they would be, just because that's where the value is going to be. But again, Tyler Warren feels like a guy to me that has potential, and maybe not for any fault of his own, but just because of the moves that are made ahead of him, with quarterbacks or linemen, the top 10 moves that are made. He seems like a guy that's got potential to slide out of the top 10 and maybe become available as one of the last true round 1 graded guys the Packers have a shot at and have to, force them to go up to get him. I don't know why. It just kind of has that feeling to me. So, but yeah, all right. So tight ends, that's kind of a loose wrap on them. I don't expect the Packers to truly prioritize the position, but it does feel like there's going to be a lot of opportunities for them that'll be hard to pass up, at this position, which I think also could be a similar situation with the running backs, right? So let's hop over with running backs. Why don't you lead us off on that one, Tim? What are your thoughts on this group here?
It's a really deep class. It's one of the better positions in the entire draft. There's guys throughout the draft. So we're going to see at least one first-round at least first round running back, possibly 2. I'm hoping we get 2 that go before the Packers, because that's going to drive down another good player for Green Bay. But certainly 1. But you're going to get guys throughout the draft who are going to be NFL running backs. I think you're going to get guys who will be starters, maybe not year 1, but down the line, you're going to get starters on day 2, and you might even get some on day 3. But certainly day 3 guys, you're going to get, running back 2s, running back 3s that contribute and stay in the league for a little while. It's very, very deep. From a Packers perspective, I don't think it's a high priority. I don't think they're going to take one on the first 2 days. In fact, I would be shocked if they did. Day 3, if there's one there that they like, he's the top guy available, sure, they may do it, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if they come out of it without a back. As good as this draft is for running backs, I'm not I think it's more likely that they don't take one than they do. But if they do, I think it could be one of those late day 3 guys. If you look at the position, I mean, Jacobs is going to get most of the carries, most of the touches. Marshawn, I almost said Lynch. Marshawn Lloyd had pretty much a wasted rookie season with his injuries, which was unfortunate.
Right.
But we got to see him on the field. And they took some steps, after his season was ended. He went down to UW-Madison, just like Christian Watson and Eric Stokes had done, to look at his lower body injuries and hopefully figure out a way to fix those injuries, so they're not, nagging injuries that affect him into the future. So he's a 3rd-round pick last year. They're going to want to see him, and he's going to be on the team next year. You just hope for health. And then I thought Emmanuel Wilson had a really nice second year for them. He under the radar, but he turned into a solid, reliable, depth running back for them. And Chris Brooks was a great pickup. I mean, they picked him up at the beginning of the year, signed him to the practice squad, coming from Miami, and then elevated him. And as the year went on, him and Wilson were, basically, they were both number 2 running backs. And I think some games Brooks would outsnap, and other games Wilson would get more snaps. But Brooks was a reliable player as well, and he was able to help passing downs. He was able to block a little bit. And then, he showed some things when he actually got carries as well. So I think they have 4 NFL running backs, and you're not going to carry 4 on your roster, but they got 4 guys that will be on NFL rosters next year somewhere. So there's already good depth. Could they add one on the 3rd day? Yeah, it's possible. But we'll see. It is a really good draft for backs. So that's why I think it's possible. But just going through the guys, Ashton Genty's the top one. He's going to be the first running back pick. There's a chance he's a top 10 pick. I don't know. We'll see how it falls. He's certainly going to be gone within the first 15 to 20 picks. Like him a lot.
I don't see him getting past Dallas.
Yeah, but do they want to take it back in the first round again? Like, they may look at it.
The fans do, but Jerry doesn't give a damn what the fans want.
Obviously. But yeah, I think Dallas is one. I think the Bears are a possibility. There's other teams too, but he gets compared a lot to Alvin Kamara. I can see that. He does Alvin Kamara things, and he's got pretty good size, but he's got that elusiveness. He runs through tackles. He runs away from tackles. I know one of the knocks as well, he played at Boise State. The competition wasn't great. He played pretty good against Oregon, and having watched him play Penn State in a playoff game, Penn State's entire defensive game plan was built around him. They weren't scared of anyone else on that team. And yes, they did a real good job against him. I still think he ended up with about 100 yards. Some of that was garbage time, but they were knocking the hell out of him. And he was, they were hitting him behind the line, and he's still breaking tackles. And it might not have looked much, but if he's getting hit 2 yards in the backfield and he's still able to pick up 3 or 4 yards on the carry, that tells you something right there. And as good as Penn State was, as good a job as Penn State did against him, I was still impressed by him, because Penn State just dominated their offensive line, and he was still, just one crease away from breaking one. And he was making it tough. Like, they weren't able to bring him down with just one defender. He's really impressive. I know, like, the last highly drafted running back was Bijan Robinson. I kind of like Bijan Robinson more than Genty, but Genty deserves to go in the first round. He's that good. So yeah, he's number 1. And then I think after that, there's a whole bunch of guys that you can say are number 2, 3, however you want to rank them. So
it's a whole field, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of impressive guys. Amarian Hampton from North Carolina's got size. He's got speed. Like him a lot. There's 2 kids out of Ohio State, which talk about them for a second. It's kind of weird that they have everything you need, I think, as running backs, but they kind of had weird careers. So Travion Henderson came on, I guess, as a freshman and was really good. Then he had an injury, wasn't as good. This year, he was kind of like up and down. Like, you saw him and you're like, I thought this guy was going to be better. Like, what happened? And then turned it on in the playoffs and was really good. Like, it's there. It's just he's had injury. He's had some inconsistency issues. I still think he could be a pretty damn good back in the right system, the right development. The other one's Quinshawn Junkins, who just transferred to Ohio State last year, before that, he was at Ole Miss, and he go back and watch some of his film at Ole Miss, man. He was awesome to watch. Maybe it was part of how they were using him in that offense, but he was fun, the speed and the explosiveness that he showed. And then he went to Ohio State, and he was kind of quiet for most of the year. It was weird. Like, you expected him running behind a good offensive line, having the receivers. Like, it just seemed like, man, this dude's going to really tear up the Big Ten. And he didn't. But then late in the year in the playoffs, he was really good again. He was really good. So I kind of liked him better in 23 than 24, but he tested great at the combine. I like Junkins a lot. But it was just weird that both of those guys at Ohio State, they have everything. Like, they look so good, but they're just like, they never really broke out at Ohio State quite like what they could be. Like, they never hit their ceiling there. But they certainly could in the NFL. And if they do, they're number one running backs. Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. Some people really like him. Good size. He seems like they run his own system there in Iowa. He seems set up for one of these outside zone running teams. Like, I could see Miami with McDaniel. I could see the Niners taking him, having him behind McCaffrey. Like, if you get him in an outside zone system, that's the fit for him. I think it's the other, like, he's not a pass catching back. He's probably not a back you want in there, a pass pro yet. He's got long ways to go there, but you get him in the right system, the right fit, you might have something. And then there's just a whole bunch of other guys. We saw Scatterbo, great year at Arizona State. Obviously, the playoff game against Texas where he got everybody's attention. DJ Giddens, I like him. He's got good size, Kansas State back, tested really well at the combine as well. Damian Martinez is another guy that's kind of under the radar. I think he's probably going to go in the middle of the draft somewhere. Highly productive at Oregon State, transferred for his last year to Miami, followed up with a really good year there. He's got good size, good cutting ability. I like him as like a middle round guy who maybe slips through the cracks and gets into like that fourth round, but you're going to get really good value with him there. But yeah, there's a bunch of guys. Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee. He's a little smaller. He's a little closer to 200 pounds, but he's a fun guy to watch too with some of his highlights. And once he gets into open space, look out, the dude can break him. He's a fun dude, and he's got some speed and elusiveness. But I think we're going to see one back for sure go in the first round. I think Hampton out of North Carolina has a shot to go in the first round as well. But I think we're going to see a run on running backs. In the second and the third rounds, a lot of guys are going to go there. And then you're going to have a few that are left over that are going to be quality, number 2s and number 3s on the third day. But I like that there's probably going to be a run on them in the second and third round because that's going to help some other, defensive linemen, wide receivers fall to the Packers. But I think that's kind of the sweet spot is day 2. We're going to see a bunch of running backs go. And I think there's a lot of good ones in this draft. And it's nice that the Packers have who they have, certainly, and that they have some depth there. But if you need a running back, this is the year to go get them because there's a lot of dudes. There's a lot of dudes with good size, and there's a lot of dudes that tested very well, have that speed and have what you need to be a number 1 or a number 1B running back.
Yeah, and that's where I think that it's obviously not a need for the Packers at this point. That
right
between Josh Jacobs and then on down, you went through them. They've got some good depth, and you certainly want to see Lloyd come back and be a true RB2 and have a role in the offense and all that. So, you'd like to be talking about running back 3 at the very most and, practice squad guys maybe. But to your point, man, this is the draft to get a running back because you're talking in different, and we've talked about this before, just across these positions. Last year, a good example is receivers, guys that were available at the end of the first, beginning of the second, in other years would probably be top 10 picks, top 15 picks, and Brian Thomas Jr. was one that I was kind of shouting about a little bit. A.D. Mitchell as well, and he didn't really have as big of a rookie year. But, man, I went back and I saw a clip the other day of how many passes were missed where he just absolutely torched the defender and the quarterback couldn't get to him. So, I mean, you look at these guys, there's some seriously good receivers that were available last year in deeper parts of the draft that otherwise wouldn't be. And I think you got to look at this running back class very similarly. Some of these guys in other years would go in the first round or would be the first or second receiver taken off the board, whether that's in the first round or not. And this year it's just incredibly deep. And it really, I think your prediction about the run on running backs makes a lot of sense, for one reason being it's very difficult to predict how other people are ranking these guys. It's not very obvious that this guy's definitely Ashton Genty's definitely the best, but after that it's just not very clear cut. It really is going to come down to how do you evaluate running backs and what are you looking for, and what do you weight heavier than this, and maybe you value speed instead of pass protection ability, or vice versa. All those things are going to come into play, and age is one of them that's going to come into play. There's all sorts of stuff here, and even just trying to parse between the two Ohio State running backs I think is pretty difficult, even though looking at Dane Brugler's board, he's got 15 spaces between them. He's got Henderson at 70 overall, and he's got Judkins at 55 overall. So it's tough, man. It's tough to figure out who's got who where and who values who where. And when you have that and that inability, that kind of that fog of war, if you will, that's when you get those runs on the position, because it's like, I got to get my guy because he probably won't be available next time around. But that does also create opportunities at other positions. You can zig while everybody else is zagging, and you can get more value out of that. So, yeah, I think at the end of the day, the Packers maybe don't come out of the second or third round with a running back, but maybe you come out of like the fifth or sixth round with a running back. After there was a run on them, you were able to get other positions and value at those positions. And now there is, maybe like a Damian Martinez sitting there still in the fifth or sixth round. And you're like, shoot, man, like that guy's talented. He probably should have gone in the third. Let's grab him. And the Packers don't necessarily have a predictable mold at running back like they do at other positions, but I feel like there's one forming with the group they have now, this like 6 foot 220 type guy. And Damian Martinez fits right into that. So that's a guy, it's like, if he makes it to a certain point, he is one that makes a lot of sense, unless they're trying to get out of that mold and kind of go a different direction, since they have so many of those bigger body guys at running back. But I love this class, man. I would not be mad about it if they got a running back out of this class.
No, I wouldn't either. And I think, like you were saying, it comes down to that value. If you're sitting there on day 3 and like top guy's a running back, and maybe he's a lot, better than higher ranked than you have everybody else, take him, take him and develop them. I would have no problem with that. There's so many guys there, but it obviously is a position where the Packers are deep, and it's a position of strength for the Packers, but that doesn't mean you can't still add to it and, raise the floor and make it more competitive, especially in a draft like this that's so rich in running back talent.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it seems like that's the attitude of the front office, right? They talk a lot about competition. They want these rooms to be competitive. They want fresh competition injected all the time. So, yeah, I think that there's an opportunity to do that. And it just depends on how the board falls for them. I see some chat going on about Savion Williams, and
we'll get to the receivers.
We're going to get to the receivers. That's one that is definitely on the radar, and I have reservations. I've got QJ PTSD over here. QJ let me down. A lot of these big body TCU receivers have let me down. So I'm really I'm hesitant to get on the Savion Williams train, but we're going to talk about that guy. Maybe next week we'll bring the receivers into the picture, and then we'll start going through the O-line a little bit. But definitely a very interesting one there. So a lot of interesting pieces. It feels like several positions have a similar theme, which is not a ton at the top to be wild about, but the depth is great, right? Like the value you can get in the later rounds is value that, it's like second, third, fourth round value in the fifth, sixth, seventh round. So there's going to be some good ones available. Receiver, I think, definitely follows that pattern. And, they're bringing in McCole Hardman. So what I've said, when the free agents they bring in point to the positions they prioritize in the draft. So now you got 3 positions that they've signed in free agency. It's corner, O-line, and receiver. So we'll see if that follows. Hopefully, I'm hoping it doesn't. To be honest, we need some defense in there. I really want to see some edge and some D-line.
They're going to go there, and I think just real quick, I know we're finishing up, but
yeah,
an important draft nugget that also came out today was Oregon had their pro day, and the Packers were represented, which they're at every pro day, right? But Goody was there. John Eric Sullivan, who's basically his number 2, was there. And then John Wojciechowski, who's, I think, director, whatever his fancy title is, but he's like the head of player personnel. So 3 of their top personnel guys were all in attendance at Oregon. Tells you something. I don't think they do that too often where, all 3 of those guys are in one spot. Maybe it was a scheduling thing, whatever. But Oregon's got a lot of good prospects. They got Derek Harmon, who both of us like a lot. They got Birch, who's another defensive lineman. He's an edge rusher. So, yeah.
They've got a good tight end, too.
They got a good tight end. They got a good offensive tackle.
Could be a sneaky pick.
Yeah, they got a good offensive tackle. So, and they got a running back, Jordan James, as well. So we're talking running backs and tight ends. But, yeah, so that's just a little nugget to put out there that they had 3, high executives represented at Oregon's pro day and probably looking at those defensive linemen.
Yeah. I think that definitely communicates something. So worth noting for sure. But yeah, it's starting to unfold, right? So the next few weeks we're going to get into it. Like I just mentioned, we'll probably hit the rest of the offense over the next week or 2 with the receivers and the O-line, and then we'll shift our attention over to the defense. We'll start figuring out who's on that radar, who's who did they meet with at the combine, all those kinds of things. We'll start to really, put the pieces together and see if we can whittle a few down or whittle down to a few. I had that backwards. But that's all we got this week on the Packers Weekly Podcast. We appreciate y'all hanging out with us tonight. You guys lit it up in the chat. We appreciate you guys. Got some good comments flying around the chat, man. We've got some knowledgeable listeners. I love this. These guys are getting after it. They're just some smart guys, smart gals probably too listening. But yeah, if y'all enjoyed this episode, please spike that like button for us. Hop over to the Packers Talk YouTube channel, subscribe there, hit that little bell next to it for those bonus points. We love y'all for hanging out with us, subscribing, watching, listening, whatever it is that you're doing with us every week on the Pack Weekly Pod. We greatly appreciate it and hope that y'all will come back and join us again next week, Packer fans.